Thomas Campbell once said, "To live in hearts we leave behind is not to die." There was a time when Britain believed it had found its next Olympic legend.
And still Board comes, and Board! Oh, she's done it!
She wasn't just winning races, she was winning hearts. Young, fearless, elegant, extraordinarily gifted. The newspapers called her Britain's Golden Girl. Every race made people believe the greatest years were still ahead. Then, everything changed. Just days after her 22nd birthday, Britain woke to devastating news. Lillian Board was dead. She was only 22. The country couldn't believe it. How could one of Europe's fittest young athletes be gone before reaching her prime? How could a future that looked so certain disappear almost overnight? For weeks, her death dominated the sporting world. Questions followed. So did heartbreak. Then, the silence began. The crowds moved on. The newspapers found new heroes. The world kept turning. And Britain's Golden Girl slowly disappeared from the story of British sport. Today, millions remember the champions who came after her. Very few remember the young woman who should have stood beside them. Why? What really happened to Lillian Board? And how did one of Britain's brightest Olympic futures become one of its most forgotten tragedies? Because this is not just the story of a gifted athlete. It is the story of a life that ended far too soon, and a future that Britain never got to see. Before we begin, subscribe now, because some stories deserve to be remembered before they're lost forever. Lillian Board was born on 13 December 1948 in Durban, South Africa, alongside her twin sister, Irene Board. Before her first birthday, the family returned to England, eventually settling in Ealing, West London. At just 12 years old, Lillian joined London Olympiades Athletics Club. Her father, George Board, quickly realised his daughter possessed something special. Most young athletes chose one event. Lillian excelled in many: the 100 metres, the 200, the 400, the 800, even the long jump. By 1966, still only 17 years old, she represented England at the British Empire and Commonwealth Games in Kingston, Jamaica. She reached the 400-metre final, finishing 5th against experienced international athletes. She returned home without a medal. But inside British athletics, people had taken notice. Back home, Lillian worked as a copy typist, then trained every evening on cinder tracks. No sponsorships, no professional contracts, only determination. Everything changed in 1967. She began breaking through internationally, winning major races, setting British records, and proving she belonged among Europe's finest athletes. The newspapers soon gave her a name: Britain's Golden Girl. She was still only a teenager. But Britain already believed its next Olympic legend had arrived. And in 1968, the world was about to discover her too. Lillian Board was no longer Britain's rising star. She was Britain's greatest Olympic hope. Still only 19 years old, she travelled to the Mexico City Olympic Games, carrying the expectations of an entire nation. The women's 400 metres had never looked stronger. Among her biggest rivals was France's Colette Besson, a powerful finisher who had quietly worked her way into contention. Lillian comfortably reached the Olympic final. The pressure was enormous, yet she looked completely unfazed. On 16 October 1968, the Olympic Stadium watched Lillian fight for gold. As the runners entered the home straight, Lillian was right where Britain hoped she would be, fighting for Olympic gold. For a moment, it looked as though she had done it. Then, Colette Besson produced one of the greatest finishes in Olympic history. Stride by stride, she closed the gap. The finish was brutally close. Besson crossed first in 52.03 seconds. Lillian followed in 52.12, a new British record, an Olympic silver medal, and a defeat by less than a tenth of a second. Many athletes would have celebrated. Lillian couldn't. She knew how close she had come. Some newspapers praised her remarkable performance. Others focused only on the gold she hadn't won. It was a harsh judgment. She had just won Olympic silver at 19, while producing the fastest 400 meters of her life. Yet the question people kept asking wasn't, how brilliant was Lillian Board? It was, how did she lose? That painful afternoon in Mexico would stay with her. Not because it broke her confidence, but because it gave her something even greater. A reason to come back stronger. And she did. Far stronger than anyone expected. The Olympic silver medal changed Lillian Board. Not because she had failed, but because she refused to let Mexico City become the greatest race of her life. The name she couldn't escape was Colette Besson. Every newspaper comparison, every headline, every conversation returned to the same Olympic finish. Lillian never blamed Besson. She respected her. But she wanted another chance. The opportunity arrived in 1969. Before it did, her season suffered an early setback. A back ligament injury forced her out of competition for several weeks. For most athletes, that would have been a major problem. For Lillian, it became another challenge to overcome. She returned during the Great Britain versus United States international meeting. She lost the individual 400 meters to American Kathy Hammond. But later that day, everything changed. Running the anchor leg, Lillian helped Britain win the 4x400 meter relay in a British record. It reminded everyone she was back. A few weeks later, Britain faced France. The race everyone wanted to see was Board against Besson. Nearly a year after the Olympic final, they stood beside each other once again. This time, Lillian refused to let history repeat itself. She crossed the line first, defeating the reigning Olympic champion. For many people, it wasn't just another victory. It was redemption. The young woman remembered for losing Olympic gold, had finally beaten the athlete who denied her. But Lillian wasn't finished. While everyone expected her to dominate the 400 meters, she was quietly preparing for something far more ambitious, a move to the 800 meters. It surprised many coaches, it surprised many rivals, and before long, it would surprise all of Europe. Moving from the 400 meters to the 800 wasn't supposed to be easy. The demands were completely different. Speed alone wasn't enough. Now, tactics mattered. Patience mattered. Endurance mattered. Many questioned whether Lillian Board could make the transition. She answered them in September 1969 at the European Championships in Athens, Greece. She reached the 800-meter final looking calm, confident, in control. She refused to chase the early pace. Instead, she waited. Then came her move. Coming off the final bend, Lillian surged past the field. She crossed the line first in 2 minutes 1.4 seconds, a championship record, and the biggest individual victory of her career. Britain had a new European champion, but she wasn't finished. Only days later, she anchored Britain's 4x400 meter relay team. Waiting for her, on the final leg, was Colette Besson once again. History had brought them together. One more time, Lillian took the baton, hunted down France, and powered Britain to another European gold. This time, in a new world record of 3 minutes 30.8 seconds. It completed an extraordinary championship. 2 gold medals, 1 championship record, 1 world record. At just 20 years old, Lillian Board wasn't simply Britain's golden girl anymore. She had become one of the finest athletes in Europe. Many believed the best was still ahead. The 1972 Munich Olympics were less than 3 years away. Few doubted Lillian Board would arrive there as one of Britain's strongest hopes for Olympic gold. No one knew she would never get the chance. By the end of 1969, Lillian Board had become one of Britain's biggest sporting stars. She was named the Sports Journalists Association Sportswoman of the Year. Soon afterwards, she received an MBE from Queen Elizabeth II. Yet away from the spotlight, Lillian remained remarkably ordinary. She still worked as a copy typist. She even made many of her own clothes, including the pink coat she wore to receive her MBE. On 5 January 1970, she appeared on BBC's A Question of Sport, alongside George Best, Tom Finney, and Ray Illingworth. She was only 21. The future looked limitless. Another Olympics, more records, perhaps the Olympic gold that had escaped her in Mexico. But while Britain looked towards Munich 1972, Lillian's greatest opponent had already entered the race. She just couldn't see it. The first signs appeared in early 1970, after racing a mile in Rome. Lillian began suffering severe stomach pain. At first, it didn't seem serious. Doctors believed it was a virus. Lillian believed it too, so she kept racing. On 13 June 1970, despite the pain, she helped Britain set a 4x800-meter world record in Edinburgh. Only days later, she lined up at the Way Championships. She won her 800-meter heat, but something wasn't right. Teammates noticed she looked pale. She had lost weight. Even walking had become difficult. On 20 June, she returned for the final. This time, she finished third. The crowd thought they had seen an off day. Nobody realized they had just watched the final race of Lillian Board's career. Soon afterwards, she withdrew from the 1970 Commonwealth Games. Britain believed its golden girl would return. She never raced again. After withdrawing from competition, Lillian underwent more medical tests. At first, doctors suspected bladder inflammation. Then, they believed it could be Crohn's disease. Weeks passed, but the pain only became worse. Further examinations and 2 biopsies finally revealed the truth. In September 1970, Lillian Board was diagnosed with terminal bowel cancer. She was only 21, and the worst was still to come. On 8 October 1970, surgeons operated at St. Mark's Hospital. What they discovered was devastating. The cancer had already spread to her stomach. According to detailed accounts of her illness, doctors believed she might have only around 2 months left. The diagnosis also left an uncomfortable question. For months, Lillian's worsening illness had been attributed first to a virus, then bladder inflammation, then suspected Crohn's disease. Only after further tests and biopsies was terminal cancer finally discovered. Whether an earlier diagnosis could have changed what followed can never be known. For her family, the diagnosis was almost impossible to accept. How could one of Europe's fittest athletes be fighting a terminal illness? Cards and letters arrived from across Britain. Supporters prayed for a miracle, but Lillian and her family refused to give up. When hope in Britain began to fade, they made one final decision: a journey to Germany that they prayed would save her life. In November 1970, Lillian traveled to West Germany. Her destination was the controversial clinic of Dr. Joseph Issels. Issels was no ordinary cancer doctor. His unconventional methods had already attracted intense controversy. He believed cancer could be fought through a combination of treatments far outside conventional medical practice. For Lillian and her family, none of that mattered as much as one thing: hope. For Lillian, it wasn't about controversy, it was about hope. If there was even the smallest chance, she was willing to take it. The treatment was exhausting: a strict diet, constant procedures, even the removal of her tonsils and 2 front teeth as part of the clinic's program. But nothing stopped the cancer. Her condition continued to deteriorate. On 11 December, she was moved into intensive care at the clinic. The following day, doctors drained fluid from her abdomen, but her condition continued to worsen. On 21 December 1970, she was transferred to the University Hospital in Munich. Doctors initially suspected peritonitis, but examinations revealed another serious problem: a blockage in her stomach. On 23 December, she underwent another operation. For a brief moment, there was hope she might recover. Instead, on Christmas Eve, Lillian slipped into a coma. She never regained consciousness. On 26 December 1970, just 13 days after her 22nd birthday, Lillian Board died in Munich. Britain had lost its golden girl, and one of the brightest futures Olympic athletics had ever seen. The news of Lillian Board's death stunned Britain. She was laid to rest on 1 January 1971. Weeks later, a memorial service was held at St. Paul's Cathedral. Her name lived on. The Lillian Board Trophy was created in her honor. A road near the Munich Olympic Park was named after her. Her fiancé, David Emery, later wrote a book telling her story. Yet something changed with time. The races were remembered, the records remained, but the young woman behind them slowly faded from public memory. Many remember Sebastian Coe, Steve Ovett, Daley Thompson. Far fewer remember the young woman who won Olympic silver at 19, became a double European champion at 20, and was gone before turning 23. Perhaps that's the greatest tragedy of all. Lillian Board wasn't forgotten because she achieved too little. She was forgotten because her story ended. Before her greatest chapter could ever be written, she never reached Munich, 1972. She never got another Olympic chance. The world never discovered just how great she might have become. And that is why Lillian Board deserves to be remembered, not only for the heartbreaking way she died, but for the extraordinary champion Britain lost far too soon. Don't forget to subscribe. Lillian Board is only the beginning.